Today we're going to talk about checklists and checklist items, how to create those and how to build a checklist for a given template to later be implemented and used on a procedure. In this test request example here, I have a checklist that has been created, and I will show this here. Over on the right hand side of the screen under the drop down menu, we can look at the checklist. And we'll notice that we kind of have three different categories of different checklist items. Each one of these is considered a checklist header. And I have these set up with probably the most basic type of checklist item in that these are a checkbox. And we'll notice as we start checking these items off that we will update the percent completion under a given header. And the intention of these is to provide a way to track a test request as it navigates through your process, and to be able to have traceable information that can go back as to when certain items were marked as being completed. In our own testing environment, we are using the checklist in place of paper documents. So eliminating handwritten documents that must be checked off by a technician, by an engineer, by a tester, by a shipping receiving person, getting all that information into LabLINK directly that can later be called upon for reporting purposes if required. To create checklist items, we want to navigate to the test request module, and we're going to go into design. Now if you've already set up parameters, sections, templates, and a procedure, you're pretty well familiar with how to navigate through the test request module. To get to checklist items, what we want to do is go over to the upper right hand corner here, and on the drop down menu we'll see that we have checklist items. Okay, so you'll see right now in our demo server here we have a very long list of checklist items that have been created. And for our demonstration purposes today, we're going to create some new ones to show some of this functionality. So what I want to do to start is I want to click on the Create button, and that's going to take me through a series of menus to help me properly set up this checklist item to capture the type of data that I would like to capture. To draw a little bit of a comparison to our test request module, you can think of checklist items very similar to parameters, meaning that it's a piece of information that we would like to capture. We also have checklist headers that you can sort of relate a test request section. So in our case here, a checklist header is going to provide a way to put an overview over top of a bunch of checklist items. So for example, in our testing environment, if we had pre-test, during test, and post-test type of checklist items that we would be interested in, that pre-test and during test and post-test could be appropriate checklist headers. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with creating those, and then we'll build checklist items that we will capture underneath them. So after I type in the name, I want to click the right arrow here, and that's going to take us to the control type. So you'll see that we have checkbox, which is the example that I showed in the very beginning of the video here, which is probably the most basic piece of information that we could collect. Checkbox meaning that the item has been completed. We have date, we have drop-down list where we can provide the user several different options. We have header, which is what I'm going to select here, and then number, text, and text box as well. So I'm going to select header, and we'll illustrate how this works. And this is going to be some of the advanced items that we are not going to cover in this video here for the visibility script. Okay, so now I've gotten to the review point, and I can see that I've got green LEDs here verifying that these items have been completed. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and create this. So you'll notice now that as I'm sorted by last modified, I now have a pre-test header. Okay, now next I'm going to create a, let's say, during test. Okay, and this is also going to be a header. And I'm going to create a post-test header as well. Okay, so then I want to create some checklist items that I will put under each of those 3 different headers that we've created. So we might have some things as simple as purchase parts. And for our control type for this type of information, this could be a checkbox, or perhaps we want to know when this was completed. So we could put in a date. Okay, and then we may have something like receive test parts. So we could have 2 different groups of people checking these items off. We may have someone from purchasing, then we may have someone from shipping and receiving, or it could be a test engineer who's going to receive these test parts. Okay, and now for here, let's say I'm interested to know, I want to have the shipping receiving clerk record their name, and I'll do that by providing a text field. And then I want to also have these parts inspected once they have been received. And I could be interested in the date and when this happens. And I'd like to illustrate now using a drop-down menu. So let's say that we're going to have someone assess the condition of these parts to make sure that they're suitable for testing. And in this case, we're going to provide a drop-down list. And this works very similar to what we've seen in the test request design module for parameters. And we're going to make this very simple and say yes or no. So for some of our during tests, let's say do something very basic here, start machine perhaps. We'll have a checkbox. Maybe we'll have monitor test. And in this case, perhaps we want a checkbox as well. Okay, now for our post test, let's have remove test parts from machine. And in this case, let's ask someone to provide their initials and the date in which they have done this. Maybe we can also do perform post-test inspection. And in this case, we will just ask for someone to use a checkbox here. And then maybe for one final operation, we'll ask the engineer to process the test report. We'll ask that they provide the date when the report was completed and delivered to the customer. We'll do that using a date control type. So we'll notice now that we've got quite a different number of checklist items with different control types here, with 3 different headers. So now to assign these, we are going to do that at a template level. So what we want to do now, while we're still in test request and design, is we want to go to templates. Now once we've navigated to templates, I need to select a template that I would like to add this checklist to. So for demo purposes, I'm going to pick vehicle test. Once I've selected vehicle test, over on the right side here, if I go down in this drop-down menu and go to checklist, We'll notice that right now there are no checklist items that have been assigned to this template. So what I want to do is click on the Edit button here, and this is going to provide me a mechanism to do this. So if I click on the drop-down menu here, now I'm going to get a listing of all of those checklist items that exist. So I remember that we had a couple that were called, we had one called pre-test. So I'm going to select that guy. We have one called during test. And we also have one called post-test. Okay, now these are headers, so these really don't contain any information that we actually want to capture. This provides us a header that we can put checklist items underneath. So what I want to do now is go ahead and enter in the specific checklist items that go underneath those headers. So the first one that I created was called purchase parts. So I'm going to take purchase parts and I'm going to drag it over into the appropriate place that I want it to fall underneath. Okay, and then next we had receive test parts. Okay, and then next we had parts inspected. Okay, so now I can, as you saw before, I can move these around if I like, but I'm actually pretty happy with the order that I have. So I've got a pre-test, during test, and a post-test headers with all of the specific checklist items that are underneath those. Okay, so I'm going to save those now. So now we'll notice if I go away from this template to one that doesn't have a checklist and I come back, we'll notice that we have all of these checklist items. So what we want to do now is if we have a procedure that is utilizing this template, we can then turn on checklist items, or if we wanted to, we could create a new procedure from this template and bring in the checklist items. So what I'm going to do now, because we've already shown in other videos how to create procedures, I'm going to go find an existing procedure that uses vehicle test template. So if I go to the right side of the screen here and I go over to procedures, and I can search by vehicle test, this is going to bring up a long list of procedures, and if I click on this procedure, you'll notice that the template that's being used here is vehicle test. So what I want to do is edit this procedure, and you'll notice that we have this use checklist checkbox that can be checked. I'm going to go ahead and check this, and I'm going to click Save. And we need to remember what this procedure name is. So this is V response time measure on air brake system. I'm going to go create a test request using this procedure to show how the checklist works. And I'm going to search for the procedure that we just mentioned, and this is right here. Okay, now I have a test request, and you'll notice that this use checklist has been checked here. I can uncheck that if I do not want to use the checklist. In order to create this, I do need to select a laboratory. So I'm going to go ahead and select a laboratory, and I'm going to provide a promise date, which is not required here. Okay, and you'll notice that there's some other fields here. I'm not going to worry about any of this. I really just want to show how the checklist functions. Okay, so I'm going to click Create Test Request. Okay, now I've created a test request. This is my test name that you see here. Now if I go to the drop-down menu like we did in the beginning of the video, I can go to Checklist. What I'm going to do now is going to go ahead and open up each one of these checklist headers, and we'll see the different types of fields that we have here. You'll notice that we have different checklist item types here. So this is a date field. So if I click on this, this is going to give me a date on when the parts were purchased. Okay, then I'm going to check that off that has been completed. Receive parts. So we were asking someone to actually put their name in here. I'll check that off as well. Parts inspected. Again, this is a date field that we're asking. Okay, and then suitable for testing was actually a drop-down menu, so there's a yes or a no. Okay, so you'll see as we start checking these items that you'll see that this percent completion is going to go based upon the number of items that are inside of each header. So this really provides a very nice way to eliminate paperwork in your testing environment. Long gone are the days where you need pages upon pages of log sheets for someone to write their initials and a date, to record values that have to be hand typed later, that can have issues with, transcribing issues, could be mistyped in. Someone forgets to fill that out, where inside of the test request here, it's pretty obvious on when an item has not been completed, because it'll show you right here what your percent completion is. So internal checks and balances could be put in place to where a dyno operator shouldn't be allowed to start a piece of test equipment if certain checklist items haven't been checked off. Test engineer shouldn't invoice a job to their customer if the test report hasn't been checked off. So things like that can be used to help make your process more efficient and better from a quality point of view. That's all that I have for checklist items today. Thank you very much for tuning in.